Good morning. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Bernadette, for bringing everybody here together today to talk about this very, very important topic. And I think we're realizing as the week moved along that it is about water, but it's about so many other things that are beyond water. And on the first day when Bob Ray spoke and he talked about governance and he talked about First Nations, and he talked about how we need to change things in this world today by governance. And I was relieved to hear him talk about that because I agree. I think that's a start. But I think that beyond governance, we have to start at the grassroots level, at the people level, where things really happen, because we can make all the rules and we can govern, but until you've convinced the people that it needs to be done, it's not going to happen. I know that when we look at First Nations, I work in New Brunswick primarily. I get to get out once in a while when someone like Bernadette invites me out. But so I do see some of the challenges through the First Nations leadership perspective, as well as the folks on the ground, the grassroots people who are the ones who have to live with the decisions that are made by governance. And through all of this, I think that I see one common thing that doesn't seem to change. The same question comes up no matter where I go, and the question is, how do you work with First Nations? And that topic comes up. And so I think, Bob Ray was talking about consultation, and I know we, as First Nations, we bring that up. And there's a duty to consult. We talk about that. And these are constitutionally protected rights. These are things we know. But beyond that, how do we work with First Nations? Because that's really the question, the core question. And I answer that in many ways, but I think there's three things you have to do. You have to ask the questions, and then you have to listen, but then you also have to understand. And I think when you talk about asking the question, you have to ask the First Nations what it is they want. Working with the Canadian Rivers Institute at UNB, I come across this quite a bit with the research, because we have thousands of research projects going on. And then I go to the communities, and the communities say, well, they really need to do this, or they need to do this. And I go, but they are. and we have to make that connection, right? So I know that the young people in this room, you are the future. You've been told this, and believe me, you are, because we'll be gone. We will all be gone. You're going to have to make those decisions as to what it is you're going to do for society. And I think it's very important to go back and ask the people. It's nice to come up with these ideas that, I think this is what we need, maybe this is how we do it, kind of guessing and filling in the gaps, as somebody brought up earlier. Very important, but let's ask the question, what is it that you need? And then, of course, the listening. Sometimes that gets a little difficult. You may be listening, but somebody might not, oops, that was somebody else's, I'll just leave that there. And so listening and understanding. So how do we do this? Sometimes you feel like you're speaking a different language, and maybe you are. There was one of the gatherings that we had, there was an elder, and I think CWN was there, and there was an elder who was kind of sitting in the back, and he kept saying, you need to check the pelicans, and this was all about fish. And someone said, well, we're not talking about birds, we're talking about fish. Why do you want to check the pelicans? And the elder said, because the pelicans don't care what kind of fish they eat all the fish. And so, that sounded kind of mysterious, but it's not mysterious. Oftentimes when the First Nations are asked about their culture, it comes up as a story. So I want to share a story with you. I share this one a lot because it's about water, it's about creation, and it solidifies for many people, I think, the importance of indigenous knowledge and how we can link indigenous knowledge with science. And the story starts, well, the story is many, many thousands of years old. But it was maybe 7, 8 years ago when I first spoke at they had a Canadian Rivers Institute Day. And at the time, the director there, Alan Curry, had asked me to come and talk about the St. John River in New Brunswick. And so I said, okay. So I told a story that's been passed along through generations of oral tradition. And the story is about our creation. And I'm going to condense it for you. So if you look it up, the story is about Aglabem. And Aglabem is the name of the monster frog. It's a giant frog that was holding back all the water in the world. And so it was sitting near Grand Falls. It's sort of in the near north of Perth, Andover. And so this monster frog was holding back all the water in the world, so the people were dying from thirst. And so the people, which is what many tribal people call themselves, as we're the people. So the people sent Glooscap. How many of you know who Glooscap is?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah, okay. So Glooscap, that we sent Glooscap up there to take care of this monster frog, holding back all the water in the world. And Glooscap said, please let go of the water. Everybody's dying from thirst. And Glooscap said, no. The frog said no. He says, I'm going to keep all the water. I need it. So Glooscap took a giant axe, felled this tree. The tree came down, hit the frog in the head. The frog let go of the water, and it created the St. John River Valley. And that was our creation story. So that first time I told that story, this is an oral tradition. The director of the Canadian Rivers Institute, after I came off the podium, he said, have you read my paper? And I said, no. And he said, I'm going to send it to you. I think you'll find it very interesting. So he sent me the paper a few weeks later. I read it, and it was about, it was published in 2005, and it was some work that he and his colleagues had done on they were using the stable isotopes in Nature Lab to kind of track the diet of trout and other freshwater fish. And what they had discovered was that there was a debris dam that was holding back all the water about the same place where the frog was sitting near Grand Falls. And this debris dam broke, and according to the Sin Lab, they said it was about 8,000 years ago. Say, okay, that's pretty neat. Yeah, it's pretty neat, but if you think about oral tradition, 8,000 years. This was told to my great-grandfather, who was the man who had told the story to Frank Speck, who was an anthropologist, who recorded this story. But it's been told to all of our children. We tell our children, our grandchildren, that's our creation story. The importance of this is that I guess what I hope is that through understanding that this story that is an oral tradition that's been carried for 8,000 years by our people will impress upon you the importance of indigenous knowledge and how indigenous knowledge and science can work together to complement one another. Because it's something that I know Heather Castleton, she was talking about two-eyed seeing. It's a concept that the elders talk about, and that's what it is. We need to see with both our eyes. And I think that if we can work together in these partnerships and build that bridge that Beverly's talking about, maybe from both ends, so that we begin to forge this partnership more strong and build on that similarity rather than sometimes we see the differences. You know, we look, unless we all wear uniforms, we look exactly the same and we eat exactly the same foods and have the same habits. We would be the same? Probably not, because we're humans. And as humans, we have our own little idiosyncrasies that are influenced by our geography, our climate, our culture. So with that, I'd like to, I brought some notes up here, some things that I didn't want to forget to mention. And one thing that, we talk about moving forward. And I think sometimes we get so wound up in moving forward that we forget to look back. And we forget to look back and look at what we have learned from the past and how what we consider to be progress may not necessarily be progress. And I want to leave you with one idea. I talked to some folks, well, I talked to most people about this, and it's an uncomfortable topic because it's something that we like to just kind of flush and put away and not think about it. But when we talk about water, we need to start talking about stopping this process where we are not literally pooping in our water. Mm-hmm. We spend a lot of time creating clean water in these water treatment plants, drinking water, and 95% of it we do not drink. Most of it, we're flushing it down the toilet. We're washing our bodies with it, which is fine, that's great. But if we can change one thing, I think that composting toilets are something that we need to seriously be leaders on. We see that as a standard, I think, in Western society is the flush. We flush it, we forget about it, and we have to quit thinking like that. And I think that by being leaders in that, you look at the world, most of the world doesn't even have a toilet. You know, most of the world doesn't have clean drinking water. So when we talk about water, let's talk about wastewater. Let's talk about not creating wastewater. Let's reuse the water that we have, and certainly let's quit pooping in it.
Right.
Okay?
Quite right.
All right. Thank you.